Hello everybody. Once upon a time, diesels were most definitely not cool, and the only reasons you'd ever want one were if you were getting a tractor, a truck, a taxi, or a company car. They were dependable, and they were durable, and relatively economical, but they most certainly were not exciting. And then along came this, the E60 generation BMW 535D, and as far as I was concerned, diesels were then very cool. And this love affair with the black fuel stretched to more than just BMWs, with it becoming the default choice for just about anybody and everybody for the next decade. Today, we appear to have come full circle, and once again diesels are desperately uncool, just about as popular as a formerly loved 1970s children's TV presenter. However, that does mean that vehicles like this are now rather affordable. And so, I know it may seem a little bit mad, but today I am absolutely delighted to finally, after near 2 decades of waiting, be able to get my hands on a BMW 535D. But will old me be just as impressed with it as young me? And is it a car you should still consider buying? Let's find out. E60 Generation 5 series and its many derivatives landed back in 2003, replacing the much-loved E39. And this was a car somewhat controversial from the very beginning, owing chiefly to its rather new looks. Designed by Chris Bangle, it was more in line with the then-new 7 series rather than the outgoing 5 and the still-then current 3. Personally, I never really had that much of a problem with it, and looking back on it now, isn't this a handsome car? No, not the prettiest thing out there, it's no Alfa Romeo, but it is just right. All the proportions are absolutely correct. It's sized nicely, it's not daunting to drive, it's wide enough that it feels roomy in here, you've got plenty of legroom for your passengers in the back, and the boot is a good size too. Though the one thing telling you just how different the world was when this car arrived was the range of engines. It launched with not a single 4-cylinder. Every engine option was either a 6 or an 8. To begin with, there was in fact just the one diesel offering, the 3-litre M57 engined straight 6 badged the 530D. However, on the petrol side of things, you had a variety of 6 pots, then at the top of the range, a couple of V8s, and of course, petrol heads will remember the M5 of the era for its mighty V10. But to me, the other iconic 5 Series has to be this, the 535D. It joined the range in 2004, and like the 30D, it's also a 3-litre straight 6 M57. However, it also came with a second turbo, giving it a very undiesel-like almost 270 horsepower. Bear in mind, back then, your 3-litre petrol would have given you more like 230 horsepower. This, then paired with the prodigious torque for which diesels were always best known, and a relatively decent fuel economy, meant this was a car that began to appeal to more than just the fleet buyer. It was a sexy diesel. My mate Henry's dad got one when I was about 15, and we went out in it a few times. I remember it being absolutely ludicrously fast for not just a diesel, but a car, full stop. And what made it even cooler to me was the fact that Henry's dad's other car was a Ford GT40, and he said in the real world this was even quicker. Since then, I've been desperate to get my hands on a 535D because to me it has been the benchmark car for sensible and fun. So, near 2 decades after its introduction, how good is it? Well, let's find out. This car I'm driving today is a very early example of the facelifted 5 Series, so it has a minor bump in power from just under 270 horses to about 282, but also slightly more torque, as if it needed it. This car now has 428 pounds-feet of the stuff. In other words, 580 Newton meters, or perhaps more usefully, more than any other 5 Series of the day, including the 5-litre V10 M5. It isn't really a rocket ship. Remember, it's 280 horsepower pushing 1 3/4 tons, but still, put your foot down and it does move. However, it is a very effortless kind of power, the car understandably dominated by that torque figure. And though the gearbox isn't brilliant, it's a 6-speed ZF torque converter automatic, as you'd have got in just about everything of the day, and if you do want to shift gears yourself, you have to do it with the lever down here. There are no paddles. It doesn't actually matter, because no matter what gear you're in, the car always has a response. Even better, once you do begin to get to sort of 3,500 RPM, which is actually quite a way around the rev counter, it does seem to pull even harder. This speedo over here just never really seems to stop going. It should tell you just how Henry's dad drove this car, that he got, I think, about 23 or 24 to the gallon out of it. And that's not right. Not that the regular fuel economy is great, this car has been averaging about 33 to the gallon, which for the performance on offer is not all that bad. Compared to, say, the equivalent V8, it's really very good, but still not impressive if you were expecting 40 or 50 mpg. That's not what the 535 was ever about. However, I do want to talk about this particular example. It's been brought to me by the lovely Christian from Heel & Toe Cars, a very small independent dealership that has a selection of, I think, really cool stuff. If you enter this kind of car, he's always going to have something that'll get you going, ooh. And that's what this car did to me when I saw it on his Instagram account, because not only was it a 535D SE, it also came in a spectacular specification. First off, you've got the blue paintwork, the beige interior, and the wood, which 20 years ago, had you shown me, I'd have gone, ugh, no. And now I go, oh, yes, please. You can also tell that whoever specified this car knew exactly what they were doing. So it's an SE, not the Sport with its bigger wheels and harder suspension. Unfortunately, this does still have run flats on, so it somewhat negates the fact it's riding on just 17-inch alloys. However, this car also features garage door opener, power folding mirrors, soft closing doors, sunroof, Logic 7 stereo, front and rear parking sensors. It even has a heads-up display. There's heated seats, heated steering wheel, which is also electrically adjustable. This is a car with a serious spec on it. It's also got just shy of 140,000 miles on, but that's exactly what I'd expect of a car like this. You'd have bought it to do big journeys fairly frequently in. However, other than the fact that the outside has got a few battle scars acquired from over the years, inside it still feels like a car in very, very good nick. This being the facelift, you also get a subtly revised exterior, a different key, which I actually quite like. You've also got an updated iDrive, which is still somewhat old-fashioned by today's standards, but actually works pretty damn well and gives you a lot of functionality. The AC blows icy cold, the parking sensors work really well, and the whole car just feels really nicely screwed together. There are also plenty of touches in here to make this just that little bit more practical and usable, from things like the load-through hatch at the back for big and bulky items. And you've even got this little SOS button up here. In case you're not familiar, that does allow you to, well, summon for help if you need it. Whether it still works or not these days, I don't really know, but it's there. The car's ride is still on the supple side, and I think if you did ditch the run flats, it'd be even better. Even the brakes are nice to modulate, and they've got plenty of stopping power, but are not overly servoed. Tyre roar and wind noise are also fairly minimal, provided you do have the sunroof cover shut. If it's open, even if the roof is not, you do still get a fair bit of noise coming through it, but that's kind of par for the course for these things. The steering still has a bit of weight to it, the odd bit of texture coming through too, but it is worth pointing out this car has not just the Servotronic variable assist power steering, but it's also got dynamic drive. In other words, an active front anti-roll bar. And though there is a good chance that these two technologies may conspire to interfere with your steering feel, it's still actually pretty decent. You've got the sense of weight and heft you'd want from an old school BMW, but still, around town, the Servotronic dials up the assistance, so it's not tiring when you're trying to park it. I had a little bit of a play with the Logic 7 system earlier, and it's very good. Even more impressively, this car also has DAB radio, which in 2007 was still something of an oddity. So it's pretty much the perfect car that I envisioned, right? Well, no, not quite. There are a few weak points in the armour of the 535D. First off, the already mentioned fuel economy. For a diesel, it's just not that great. Many a modern turbo petrol will do at least as good, if not somewhat better. Secondly, it is now an old car, which means old infotainment, and though it can be upgraded, you can make it a little more modern. That's going to involve spending a fair bit of money. Tax is not horrendous. I believe it's about 320 quid a year, but because it is an old diesel, there are lots of places you can't take it or can't take it without having to pay a fairly hefty penalty. It is highly unlikely to be compliant with just about any ULEZ zone you're ever likely to encounter, and that for many, I know, will be a deal breaker. And though I'm sure thanks partly to its twin turbos, it's far more responsive than you might expect, shaming again even many a modern engine. It's still not quite as interactive or certainly good to listen to as a straight 6, petrol or a V8. From the inside it does a fairly good job of masking what it is, but from the outside when it goes past you can still hear that distinctive diesel clatter, but accompanied by just the faintest whiff of BMW straight 6. But back on the subject of good news, on account of diesel's rather spectacular fall from grace, where a few years ago a 545 or 550i would be the cheaper option and this the more desirable, today the tables have been turned. And though a 550i is a very, very cool thing indeed, they're relatively hard to get a hold of and they will drink. This though, provided the ULEZ bit isn't an issue, is going to be a far more usable proposition, and I'm sure on the motorway you can certainly beat the 33 mpg. Even better though, this example is currently up for sale at just £5,500. And I've got to say, it feels like a lot more than £5.5 grand's worth of car this. The very cheap early examples are selling for between sort of 3 and 4, but this being a later, a facelift, and with a little bit of history, provenance, and all of the toys, I think is certainly worth the extra. So, somebody please buy it, because otherwise I might have to. I'll put a link to it in the description down below. And so, as ever, I want to say a big thank you to Chris for bringing out yet another one of his cars, and to you for watching. Don't forget to hit the like button, comment down below, and subscribe if you haven't already. I'll see you for the next one. Bye-bye.